Dr. Moore's Diaries, Whispers from the Morgue. Episode 2, The Anatomical Theaters, When Autopsy Became Public Spectacle. I am Dr. Moore's, and welcome back to Whispers from the Morgue, where we explore the darker corners of medical history. Tonight we pull back the curtain on one of medicine's most theatrical chapters, the anatomical theaters of Renaissance Europe. The birth of public anatomy. The human body was once considered sacred and inviolable, its internal workings a divine mystery. For centuries, the Catholic Church prohibited dissection, viewing it as desecration of God's creation. Galen's ancient texts from the 2nd century, largely based on animal dissections, remained the unquestioned authority on human anatomy for over a millennium, despite containing numerous errors. But as the Renaissance dawned, a scientific revolution stirred. By the 16th century, a perfect storm of cultural forces, the humanist revival of classical learning, artistic interest in anatomical accuracy, and medical need for better understanding, created the conditions for a radical change. It was in the Italian universities of Bologna and Padua where this change manifested most dramatically. In 1594, the world's first permanent anatomical theater was constructed in Padua, followed by Bologna's in 1595. These weren't merely classrooms, they were theaters in the truest sense. Architectural marvels of mortality. Picture this, a 6-tiered wooden amphitheater, elliptical in shape, rising steeply around a central table. The Paduan theater could accommodate up to 300 spectators. The design was no accident. It ensured that everyone could see the dissection below, where life's greatest mystery was illuminated by flickering candlelight. The anatomical table itself was designed to drain bodily fluids through special channels. Above it hung a chandelier, and nearby stood a lectern where a professor would read from Galen or other authorities while a demonstrator, often a barber surgeon, performed the actual cutting. The architecture reflected the social stratification of the era. Faculty occupied the lowest tier, closest to the action. Medical students stood behind them. The highest galleries were reserved for the general public and distinguished visitors, aristocrats, artists, and the morbidly curious. The Winter Festival of Death. These dissections were not daily occurrences. They were seasonal events, performed almost exclusively in the coldest months of winter, January and February, when decomposition occurred more slowly. Without modern preservation techniques, the race against decay was a serious constraint. The public demonstrations typically lasted 3 to 4 days, following a strict order of examination. First came the abdominal cavity with its rapidly decomposing organs, then the thoracic cavity, followed by the brain, and finally the extremities. This progression wasn't just practical, it had symbolic significance, moving from the lower functions to the higher ones, culminating with the examination of the brain, the seat of reason. Theatrical elements and ceremony. These weren't merely scientific demonstrations, they were cultural performances. The proceedings often began with a formal procession of faculty in academic regalia. Musicians might play during intervals, creating an atmosphere that was part carnival, part sacred ritual. In Bologna, the dissection coincided with carnival season, that liminal period before Lent when social norms relaxed. The timing was deliberate, allowing a temporary suspension of taboos surrounding death and the body. The anatomist himself was both scientist and performer. Take Andreas Vesalius, the revolutionary Belgian anatomist who taught at Padua. Breaking with tradition, Vesalius insisted on performing dissections himself rather than merely reading from a text while an assistant did the cutting. His demonstrations drew massive crowds, fascinated by his showmanship and his challenges to Galenic orthodoxy. The politics of procurement. One question remains central to this macabre spectacle. Where did the bodies come from? Most were those of executed criminals, primarily men. The sentence of dissection was considered an additional punishment beyond execution. a denial of burial rights. Occasionally, the bodies of unclaimed hospital patients were also used. The scarcity of cadavers led to notorious cases of grave robbing, creating a shadow economy around death that would persist for centuries. In some cases, anatomists like Vesalius admitted to stealing bodies from gallows under cover of darkness. The gender politics of dissection are also revealing. Female cadavers were rare and typically reserved for demonstrating reproductive anatomy. When female bodies were dissected, additional measures for modesty were often employed, reflecting the period's gender norms. Scientific revolution through public spectacle. These theaters served as crucibles for revolutionary ideas. Vesalius's seminal work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, 1543, featured intricate illustrations from his public dissections that challenged over 200 of Galen's anatomical errors. In these spaces, direct observation began to supplant ancient authority. When Realdo Colombo discovered the pulmonary circulation of blood in the Paduan theater, contradicting Galen's description, it represented a seismic shift in how medical knowledge was constructed. The public nature of these demonstrations served to legitimize anatomy as a discipline. By making dissection a respectable public event rather than a clandestine practice, anatomists gained cultural acceptance for their work. The spectators. Between education and entertainment. Who attended these spectacles? Medical students, certainly. Their education was the ostensible purpose. But the galleries are also filled with artists studying musculature and proportion. Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and later Rembrandt all attended dissections to perfect their depictions of the human form. The general public came too, aristocrats, merchants, clergy, and commoners, all drawn by a complex mixture of scientific curiosity, philosophical contemplation of mortality, and the undeniable allure of the forbidden. Contemporary accounts describe both reverent silence and carnival-like atmosphere, depending on the demonstration and audience. Some spectators fainted at the sight of internal organs, others engaged in scholarly debate about what was revealed. Admission was typically controlled through tickets, with fees charged to non-students. These performances were, in many ways, the precursors to both scientific conferences and public entertainment. Decline and legacy. By the 18th century, the theatrical nature of public anatomy began to wane. The spectacle gradually gave way to more strictly educational approaches. The establishment of dedicated medical schools and improved preservation techniques changed how anatomy was taught. The last public dissections occurred in the early 19th century, though several of the original theaters survive as museums, including the magnificent Paduan Theater where Vesalius once demonstrated. Yet the legacy of these spaces extends far beyond architecture. The Anatomical Theater represented a crucial moment in Western cultural history, when the human body ceased to be solely a divine creation and became an object of scientific inquiry, when empirical observation challenged textual authority, and when the boundaries between public and private, sacred and profane, science and spectacle blurred. Modern medical education, with its emphasis on direct observation and hands-on learning, traces its lineage directly to these wooden amphitheaters. Even today's public fascination with forensic science and medical dramas echoes the complex emotions that once drew crowds to witness the opening of the human form. Conclusion. The anatomical theaters of Renaissance Europe were spaces of contradiction, where death taught about life, where taboo became spectacle, where ancient knowledge crumbled under the weight of direct observation. They were crucibles of modern medicine, forged at the intersection of science, art, religion, and entertainment. As we close this examination, I invite you to consider how these public dissections changed our relationship with our own bodies, transforming them from divine mysteries into scientific subjects, a transformation that continues to shape medicine today. Today, preserved anatomical theaters like those in Padua, Bologna, and Uppsala stand as hauntingly beautiful monuments to this peculiar chapter in medical history, when death education was a social event and the human body's final performance played to a captivated audience. Until then, remember that every medical advance has its own story, often stranger and more fascinating than we might imagine. Next episode, The Body Snatchers, when graves became medical supply chains.